Welcome in, I'm Artris, and with OP15 right around the corner, that means that the release events will be happening this week from March 27th all the way to April 2nd, in which you will be able to participate in this and get early access to OP15 and EB04. So what is a release event? Well, in these release events, you are given 6 packs of the new set, so in this case, OP15, and from those 6 packs, you can make a 40 card deck using any combination of colors. More recently, stores have started straying away from bringing your own type of leader to these events and instead providing the Rainbow Luffy, which says this leader can only be used in designated events according to the rules. This leader is treated as a card with all card names, types, and attributes according to the rules. This unlocks a lot of cards, as some cards in the set are tied to specific leaders, so you can actually use those effects because this acts as all leaders. So we will approach the release guide with this leader in mind, but if your store is one of the stores that lets you bring your own leader, these 3 leaders are probably the best to bring to this type of event. So with all that aside, how do you pick the best 40 cards to put into your deck? I like to use the acronym Grape to help me keep a priority checklist of the cards that I should be putting into my deck. And this stands for Game Changers. Now, these are cards that will typically win you the game on the spot, and if your opponent can't answer it, then it will carry away a game quite quickly. These don't always have to win you the game though, but these are cards that are definitely going to be high priority for you to pick into your deck, usually with really strong stat lines, typically going to be 8,000 or more power, but sometimes these cards don't necessarily have to have that power. They might have other effects that really lead you to game-winning states. The R stands for removal, so any kind of cards that can answer your opponent's board and put tempo back into your favor. The A stands for advantage, so any kind of card advantage, whether that is either searching out cards in your deck, drawing more cards in your deck, or even denying your opponent resources. The P stands for protection, so any kind of 2Ks, counter events, or blockers are cards you're going to want to add into the deck. And the E stands for everything else. Once you've gone through the rest of the checklist and you have cards that don't necessarily fit into the other categories, that's where these cards will come into play. Typically, your deck will be made of most of these kind of cards because finding the other categories is going to be very difficult, of course. But with this, you're going to try to find cards that have solid stat lines, whether that's going to be 5/7s, 6/8s, 7/9s. You're not always going to find those though, and sometimes you will have to settle for cards that have a 4/5 stat line or maybe have an interesting effect. So moving right into the Game Changers, these are cards that I think will have quite an impact on most of your games. If you can find them, then you should absolutely add these to the deck. Starting off, we have Smoker and Tashigi from EB04. This is an 8-cost, 8,000 power rush card that says on your opponent's turn, your Navy type leader's base power becomes 7,000. So not only does this card have immediate impact by rushing in, the following turn and then every turn after that, if it sticks on the board, your Rainbow Luffy, which then takes the Navy type, becomes a 7,000 base power leader on defense, which is going to be very difficult for your opponent to move past. It's a permanent 2K counter that you don't have to worry about out of your hand every turn. Very similarly to this card, we have the 7-cost 9,000 power Zoro. It's an on-play up to one of your leaders gains plus 2,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn, and then activate main once per turn. If your opponent has a character with 8,000 power or more, this character gains rush character during this turn. So it's a pseudo rush where you can only rush in if you have an opponent's character rested, and of course it only gets that if there is an 8,000 power character or more on the opponent's side of the field, but you do get that plus 2,000 power buff for a whole turn cycle, which in very tight moments where you are low in hand size, this actually becomes a quite crucial card to play. Also following along the same lines of buffing your leader, we have the 10-cost 12,000 power Luffy from EB04. If you have 1 or less life cards, give this card in your hand -1 cost, and then on play you may trash 1 card from your hand. Your leader gains plus 2,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. Then this character gains blocker until the end of your opponent's next turn. So not only does it buff your leader by plus 2,000 for an entire turn cycle, you also have a blocker established for in case you need to be able to block a hit that will be higher than your leader's defense. And then after this turn, it does lose the blocker, but it is a 12,000 power swing. And in this set, there's nothing that can really answer this card. So if this card is unchecked, which likely it will be, this card will often win you just the game on the spot. Then into OP15, we have the 6-cost 7,000 power Jin. I think this card is going to be very impactful because of the fact that it says if your leader has the East-Blue type, play up to 1 character card with a cost of 5 or less from your hand. Of course, Rainbow Luffy has the East-Blue type, and it doesn't state that the 5-cost character has to be a certain color. So it can be any color 5-cost character in your hand. So if you're going second, this is a great card to play on 6 because then you can cheat 2 bodies out. In some scenarios, you can get this 7,000 power body plus an additional 5-cost 7,000 power body, and that kind of tempo is really hard for your opponent to swing back from. Then we have the 8-cost 9,000 power Krieg. On play, give up to 3 of your opponent's rested Dawn cards to one of your opponent's characters. Then this character gains Rush. Activate main once per turn. If this character was played on this turn, give all of your opponent's characters minus 1,000 power for each Dawn card given to that character during this turn. So the Rush ability here is really big. The stat line's also very nice, and 9,000 power body is really strong in this meta. But what's really great here is this acts as pseudo removal because you are able to then reduce the power of characters on the side of the field based on how you spread out that Dawn. So if you want, you can put 3 Dawn under one character, so it's minus 3,000 power, or you can spread that Dawn out and have minus 1,000 power across the board. Then we have the 6-cost 6,000 power Brook. I think this card has a lot of potential for endgame. I don't necessarily think this card alone is that great, but I think because of the fact that it has such an interesting effect that you're going to have to respect this card if your opponent has 6 Dawn up. So it says on play, rest up to one of your opponent's cards. Activate main, you may trash this character. If your leader has the Straw Hat Crew type, set up to one of your characters with a base cost of 8 or less as active, which this hits a lot of cards in the meta. There's not a lot of cards that are going to be 9 or 10 cost. Obviously the yellow Luffy, which we just talked about, but of course if that card is swinging alone, you don't really need it to restand. This character can restand pretty much any card that you're going to be drafting, and so of course your opponent might not expect a double swing there, and with this card being able to rest a blocker plus also then restand a character, like I said, this will have a lot of impact towards the end game state. I almost didn't want to put this Kairos into the game changers category because I wasn't sure how impactful this card is, but I do think it is rather strong and can be quite the nuisance and can also win the game on the spot because of the Rush here. It says on play, you may trash 1 card from your hand. If your leader is Rebecca, this character gains Rush during this turn, and then on KO, add this character card from your trash to your hand. So it is very sticky. If your opponent tries to remove it through battle, it just goes back into your hand, and of course you can replay it and give it Rush the next turn by discarding a card. So I think that this card has a lot of potential for some endgame scenarios where you need an additional swing, and this can get you across that finish line. Then we have the blue 3-cost 4,000 power Sanji blocker. It says on play, up to one of your characters gains unblockable during this turn. So you have to respect this card. In the release event meta for OP15, it is very dangerous to go down to 0 now because of the fact that if you do establish blockers, all of those are null and void with this one card because you can then give any character on your side of the field unblockable. So this card is very powerful and of course will likely win a lot of games over the weekend. The 7-cost Luffy is a little bit more niche and I don't necessarily think it's a great card overall, but if you can get the effects off, I think that this card has a lot of potential in this meta. Of course, you're going to have to trash a lot of cards. There are a lot of cards that help you fill up your trash in this set, so it's not impossible. This card says each of these effects are activated based on the number of cards in your trash. If you have 10 or more cards in your trash, this character's base power becomes 9,000 and it gains plus 10 cost. If you have 20 or more cards in your trash, your leader's base power becomes 7,000 during your opponent's turn. That's the big one there. And then if you have 30 or more cards in your trash, which I doubt anyone's going to be hitting, this character gains plus 1,000 power. I think if anything, the 10 cards in your trash is probably going to be the easiest to hit, obviously, but it's going to still be a challenge. I don't know about you guys, but in my release events, I don't typically get to 10 in trash. But like I said, there are some cards in this set that will help you fill up your trash along the way. So this might be an option if you notice those cards in your pool. And then to round out the game changers, we have the 5-cost 7,000 power secret Luffy in yellow. It says if you have 6 or more Dawn cards on your field, this character gains Rush, and then when your opponent activates an event or blocker, reveal up to 1 card from the top of your life cards, and this character gains plus 1,000 power during this turn per 1 cost of the card that has been revealed. So if you have a 5-cost character that is revealed at the top of your life, this character gains plus 5,000 power. That is insane value, and of course, if your opponent is trying to block her up, they are not feeling very comfortable using those blockers because then this gets buffed for free. So as a result, I think this Luffy is very powerful. And of course, going second with this card is going to be really great because you can get that rush off immediately on your 6 Dawn turn. So I think this Luffy is going to be very highly sought after. Of course, in the secret rare position, it will be a little bit harder to find, but not impossible. On to removal, we have Distorted Future, which is a 1-cost event that says main, if you have 2 or less life cards, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 3,000 power during this turn. That's very nice for being able to trade into bodies that are tapped. So in a way, this counts as removal. It's not just straight up hard removal saying remove something from the field, but it allows you to trade into your opponent's bodies a lot easier. Along the same lines, this zero cost event from EBO4, It's My Student's Farewell, I want it to be proper. It says main, you may give one active Dawn card to up to one of your Silver's Rayleigh, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn. So for essentially one Dawn, you get to go minus 2,000 on a tapped body, making it easier to trade into. Another card from EBO4 is the 4-cost Finger Pistol Yellow Lotus. It's a main. You may trash 2 cards from the top of your deck and KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a base cost of 5 or less. And the trigger says activate this card's main effect. So this is a very strong card to be able to answer an opponent's board if they just played out a threatening 5-cost character. Of course, having this trigger out of life is also the most important thing here, and one of the reasons you might want to include this in the deck. And in yellow, we have the 6-cost Black Rope Dragon Twister. It's a main. You may turn 1 card from the top of your life cards face up. If the number of your characters is less than the number of your opponent's characters, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less, and up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. So this is a very interesting card. I think it's actually very overpowered and statted for what it's trying to do. So if you can find this card, I would recommend putting 1, maybe even 2 in your deck. If you happen to trigger it off of life, it's a draw 2 trash 1, so even that is a very good stat line. I think this card is an auto include in my deck if I find 1, and I might even want to consider adding a second one if I do find it, but do keep in mind that sometimes this card could be dead. You might want to include 1 at a maximum. Into OP15, we have the 7-cost Fire Fist. It says up to one of your leaders gains plus 3,000 power during this turn and give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 8,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. Then you may trash 2 cards from your hand. If you do, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 0 power or less. I'm not the biggest on this card in this format. I think it's a good card in Lucy, but I don't know if it's going to be a great card in a release format. However, it does allow you to swing for 8,000 with your leader, and on top of that, it does essentially remove a swing from your opponent's side of the field. You don't have to trash the 2 cards to KO the opponent's character. That character that has minus 8,000 power means that it's going to be minus 8,000 power until the end of your opponent's turn, so that means that it will not be able to effectively swing without having to add Dawn on top of that. So this could act as a pseudo removal, or you can also use this as a way to trade into a rested body that might be really tall. Next, we have the Just Watch Me Ace event. It's a 4-cost event that says if you have 4 or more events in your trash, give this card in your hand minus 3 cost. And then main counter, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 3,000 power during this turn. I think this is a very situational card. It's not an auto include for me as far as removal goes, but I do think it's one to consider if you are running a lot of events in your deck. Otherwise, I think paying 4 to minus something by 3,000 isn't a great cost, but of course the reduced cost is what we're trying to achieve here. It's going to be harder in a release event, but it is possible. If you're not finding a lot of events though, then I wouldn't bother putting this in the deck. Next, we have the 7-cost 7,000 power Kuro. It's a blocker on play. Give up to 2 of your opponent's Dawn cards to one of your opponent's characters. Then at the end of this turn, up to one of your opponent's rested characters with 3 or more given Dawn cards will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase. So being able to stun a body from attacking is removal in my opinion, because you are evading an attack for a turn. So I think this Kuro is a really great card, of course, because of the fact that it's not only preventing an attack from happening, but it's also a blocker on top of that. And if you want to swing with it afterwards, it's got a really great stat line. So this is one of the better cards in the set to be able to grab from the release event. It is a rare, so it's going to be a little bit easier to find, so I would expect to add these in your deck. On top of that, it has a 1k counter, so overall, just a solid card. Next, we have the 4-cost 5,000 power Kuma in green. On play, up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less cannot be rested until the end of your opponent's next end phase. Very similar to the Kuro, it's just preventing an attack for a turn, so allowing you to either stabilize or further push your advantage. Then in purple, we have the 0-cost Lightning Dragon event that says main Dawn -1, draw 1 card, then up to one of your opponent's rested characters with 6,000 power or less will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase. So once again, dodging an attack is very useful in these scenarios. Preventing it from refreshing if it has a when attacking effect also is very strong, and you get to draw a card off of this as well. Then another card that's worth mentioning, but I don't necessarily think is going to make the cut, is a 1-cost I Find It Embarrassing as a Human Being event. It says main, if you have 10 or more cards in your trash, up to one of your opponent's characters with a base cost of 5 or less cannot attack until the end of your opponent's next end phase, and then the trigger says activate this card's main effect. This card can come in handy if you're finding a lot of the trash cards to be able to fill up your trash with. However, if you're not seeing that, then I wouldn't bother adding this into the deck. Next up, we have the 5-cost 6,000 power Kamakiri. It's an on play. You may trash this character and add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less. I think that this card is very situational. There's probably some scenarios where you're going to need to get past a 6-cost character, maybe a blocker for going for game. You could potentially swing with this first, use the effect, and then get rid of that blocker. Otherwise, I don't necessarily think that this card's effect is very useful because you are having to get rid of a body, lose a life, in order to be able to get rid of one character on the opponent's side of the field. I don't think that's a great trade-off, but there are very niche scenarios where this can come in handy. Next up, we have Wiper, a 5-cost 6,000 power character in yellow that says on play, you may turn one card from the top of your life cards face up, give all of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn, then KO all of your opponent's characters with 0 power or less, and then activate main once per turn. Give up to one of your Rested Dawn cards to one of your Sky Island type leader or character cards. So if your opponent has established some small blockers, then this is a great way to get rid of those. Otherwise, this is a great card to be able to trade into the opponent's board. Giving your opponent's side of the field minus 2,000 power for that turn makes it a lot easier to trade into. On top of that, this card will allow you to give a Rested Dawn card to your leader or a character that is Sky Island, so that is also recurring value over the course of a game, but the most important thing here is being able to minus 2,000 power. And then finally, we have the 2-cost impact event that says main KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, then add up to one card from the top of your life cards to your hand. This is very similar to the Zeus 2K, but of course slightly worse because it's not a 2K, and of course it has to get rid of a 4-cost character instead of a 5-cost. But this is a very cheap removal tool, so if you want to add this into the deck, I wouldn't blame you. I think I might want to add one into the deck as well because of the fact it has a trigger KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, so you can get that for free if it comes out of life, which is very nice. Into the A category for advantage, so these are cards that are going to be able to either draw you cards, find cards for you, or deny your opponent any kind of cards for themselves. First off, we have Kobe, which is a 6-cost 7,000 power character. Once per turn, if your leader has a Navy type and this character would be removed from the field, you may trash one card from your hand instead. That's not the reason why this is in this category. Instead, the second part of this, your turn once per turn, when one of your opponent's characters is KO'd, draw one card, is the main reason this is here, because you are able to get card advantage based off of you getting rid of your opponent's board. That is kind of the gameplay you're going to always want to do anyway, or at least that's how I play the game, and so this card will help me gain card advantage over the course of a game by sticking to the game plan I usually like to play anyway. Next, we have Lucci, a 4-cost 6,000 power character that says if your leader's type includes CP, this character gains plus 2 cost and plus 1,000 power for every 5 cards in your trash, and then on play, you may trash one of your characters, draw one card. Trashing a character to be able to draw a card doesn't seem like the greatest trade-off there. However, if you do have a smaller character that you don't necessarily care about, maybe it's already gotten value for you, you can get even further value by getting rid of it and then drawing a card in its place. So this card is at least worth running because of the fact that it grows over the course of a game, plus also can draw you a card immediately. I consider any kind of yellow cards that heal you to fall under the advantage category because eventually you'll be getting those cards back in hand. So the 7-cost 7,000 power Kuma is a great card for this category. It says on play, if you have 2 or less life cards, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards, and then on KO, add up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards to the owner's hand. So of course you do have to be at 2 or less life. It is a little bit scary to play this at that point in the game. Maybe you're wanting to establish blockers, or maybe you're wanting to go a little bit taller. But this card is a very solid card regardless, because you will be able to heal off of this going up to 3. And then, of course, your opponent doesn't necessarily want to get rid of this because it means they're going to have to take a life in the process of doing that. And very similarly to the previous card in Kuma, the 5-cost 6,000 power Borsalino, on play, if you have 2 or less life cards, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards, and it has blocker. You're probably going to find this card a lot less than the Kuma, but I do think that this card is better because it has blocker on top of the ability to be able to heal. So it basically protects a life plus also draws you a card. So Borsalino is probably one of the better cards to be able to get out of this set. Into OP15, we have Red Buggy, a 3-cost 4,000 power character that says when attacking, give up to 1 Rested Dawn card to its owner's leader or one of their characters, meaning itself, plus also on KO, draw 1 card. So if your opponent wants to get rid of this, they're going to have to give you a card in the process. Then we have the Barrier Bulls 3-cost event that says main, draw 1 card, then your leader gains plus 1,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. It's not the greatest card, but technically it counts because you're able to dig a little bit further into the deck. Plus, you're a 6,000 power minimum defensive leader on your opponent's turn, so that is not the worst card overall. It has an interesting trigger, being able to give one of your opponent's characters minus 4,000 power during the turn, so it can come in handy if some lethal situations are happening and you get that free minus 4,000 power. Sometimes you can come out alive in those scenarios, but otherwise this is a cycle your card and gain 1,000 power for an entire turn cycle. In blue, we have the 5-cost 6,000 power Sai. It's a blocker, and on play, you may trash one event card from your hand and draw 2 cards. I really like this card. I think that this card is going to be one that is going to want to fit into the deck more times than not. Not only is it a blocker, so it can protect your life, but it's kind of like the Purple Rosinante, where you're pitching an event card from your hand and then getting 2 cards in its place. And based off of the amount of event cards that are in this set, it's not unlikely for you to have an event card that you may not need at the moment. And so just trashing that to be able to dig a little bit deeper into the deck and maybe see some pieces that you could use on the following turn is a great trade-off. Very similar to Sai, we have the 4-cost 5,000 power Chin Jiao. This is an on-play. You may trash one event card from your hand and then draw 2 cards. It doesn't have blocker though, so it's a little worse in my opinion, and of course the stat line being a 4-5 instead of a 5-6 hurts a little bit more, but it has a nice little on KO effect that says on the opponent's turn, on KO, your opponent places 1 card from their hand at the bottom of their deck, so this also denies them a resource while also drawing you cards. So I don't think this is the worst card in the set, and I think if I'm looking for cards to fill the deck out with, this is definitely one that makes the cut. Next up, we have the 3-cost Go Ahead and Use 'em Mr. Luffy event card. It's a main, choose one of the 2. Draw 2 cards, or up to one of your Dressrosa type characters gains blocker until the end of your opponent's next turn. Oftentimes, you'll just be doing the draw 2 cards because it's a 3-cost draw 2, so kind of like Sanji's Pilaf. Very good trade-off there, being able to get a little bit further into the deck and getting rid of an event in the process that's going to be bulking up your hand. Otherwise, this card does suck drawing into late-game scenarios where maybe you need a playable body. But of course, drawing 2 cards in the early game is where this really pays off. Next up, we have the Would You Let Me Eat the Flame Fruit 7-cost blue event. It says main, draw 2 cards, then if your leader is Lucy, your leader gains double attack and plus 3,000 power during this turn, and then it has a trigger that says draw 2 cards. So I'm putting this in the deck at least a 1 of no matter what, because if you get that trigger to draw 2 cards for free, it feels great. Of course, you can get that draw 2 off of just playing this, but we're looking to try to get the trigger with this one. Next up, we have Charlotte Lola. It's an on-play, trash 3 cards from the top of your deck, and then on KO, add up to 1 character card with a cost of 8 or less from your trash to your hand. So essentially, this is a searcher. Being able to put cards into your trash and then getting 1 out later on will allow you to reoccur hand size. You can also add 2Ks into your hand if you need 2Ks, so it's situational based off of this. Of course, this card has to be KO'd in order for this to happen, so your opponent might ignore this card overall, and if that's the case, that's also fine because you're going to be able to poke your opponent down with this card over the course of a game. Then we have the 5-cost 7,000 power Nico Robin. It's if you have 10 or more cards in your trash, this character gains blocker, and then on play, draw 2 and trash 2. So I really like the on play here. You don't have the blocker immediately, but you can build up to the 10 cards in trash with this on play effect. But if you don't even get the blocker effect here, just having a 5-cost 7,000 power swing every turn is really great. Of course, I really like cards that are allowing you to filter out your hand. Getting rid of the worst cards in your hand is always great. So I really like this Nico Robin, and I think it's probably going to be a card that will be a little bit of an all-star to be able to draft if you can find it. Of course, it is a common, so it's going to be pretty easy to find overall. Next up, we have the 4-cost 6,000 power Zoro in yellow. On play, you may trash 1 card from your hand, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. This is not necessarily card advantage in the sense that you're getting that card back like the 7-cost Kuma. You don't have to pitch a card in that card or with the Borsalino pitching a card there. You do have to pitch a card for this one to be able to heal up, but you can do it at any stage of the game. Of course, pitching that card, you're going to be getting that card back if you do take that hit. So it's essentially like cycling the worst card out of your hand to be able to get a random card from the top of your deck. Then we have the 1-cost Hiso event. It's a main, draw 1 card, then give up to 1 rested Dawn card to one of your Sky Island type leader or character cards, and the trigger says if your leader has the Sky Island type, draw 2 cards. So this card cycles itself very early on if you need to get rid of this. If it's in life though, you're really happy to see that draw 2 because it's a free draw 2. So this, along with the potential of Would You Let Me Eat the Flame Fruit, if these are in your life and you're just drawing a bunch of cards, you're probably going to win the game more than likely. And then finally for this category, we have the 6-cost 8,000 power Enel. If you have 6 or less Dawn cards on the field, this character cannot be removed from the field by your opponent's effects and gains plus 2,000 power. And then on play, Dawn -1, look at 5 cards from the top of your deck and add up to 1 card to your hand, then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order and trash 1 card from your hand. So this will allow you to be able to find any card you like from the top 5 and get rid of the worst card in your hand afterwards. So it thins your deck out a little bit. It will allow you to pick what cards you need for the next turn or two, and of course it will be able to filter your hand a little bit by trashing a card. The trashing the card is the worst part of this, but I think it's a fair trade-off by grabbing the best card out of the top 5 of your deck. The first half of this clause, giving it plus 2,000 power and not being able to be removed by your opponent's effects, isn't going to be taking place in the release event because you will be going past 6 Dawn very often. You're not playing the purple Enel, so that effect won't ever really be possible. But the fact that this is a 6 cost 8,000 power body that just finds something is just really good. And then on to the protection category. These are going to be any kind of 2Ks, blockers, or counter events that keep you healthy. I think there's something like 30 something 2Ks in this set. Typically, you're going to want to have 8 to 10 in your deck. So you have plenty to choose from, but these are going to be the most important out of the ones you can. With Pacifista, this is a 1 cost 1,000 power 2K that says if you have Jewelry Bonnie and you have 0 life cards, this character gains blocker. I did mention that you're not necessarily going to want to go to 0 in this meta because of the fact that the 3 cost blue Sanji is a card, but if you do happen to go to 0 and this card is on the field, you will be able to have a blocker for only 1 cost, so that's a nice little trade-off there. Then we have the 1 cost Conus. This is an on-play if the number of your life cards is less than the number of your opponent's life cards, draw 2 and trash 2 from your hand, so being able to filter out is very nice. And then of course the trigger is draw 2 and trash 1 from your hand, so yet again another trigger that allows you to dig further into the deck. Then some of the other 2Ks you're going to want to add to the deck that have some usefulness are going to be any of the 5 cost 6,000 power bodies. I think there's about 5 in total, which you can see on your screen right now. Other than that, the other 2Ks in this set are going to be just 2Ks for the most part. There are some that have niche effects, but I think you're going to want to keep those in your hand instead. On to counter events. We talked briefly about Distorted Future for the minus 3,000, but it does give you a plus 3,000 for your leader. We also talked a little bit about It's My Student's Farewell. I want it to be proper. This is also a counter event that allows you to go plus 2,000. I'll Whip You Into Shape is also another counter event that gives your leader plus 3,000 during a battle. It's in Order, Do Not Defy Me is a counter event that gives your leader plus 4,000 power during the battle. Now keep these in mind that this does not affect characters, so the ones that we talked about that affect your leader only affect leader. The 0 cost Rayleigh event does affect characters though, so that's a nice little trade-off. Then we have a whole slew of 0 cost purple events that allow your Enel to gain 2,000 power during this battle. If you have a character Enel, then that counts, but otherwise it should just be your leader that gains the plus 2,000 power. Then we have Mama Ragan. It's another 0 cost event that allows you to gain 1,000 power for one of your characters or leaders, and then if you have 6 or less cards on your field, draw 1 card. So this isn't the best counter event, but it does allow you to draw into your deck to find further counter. So the +1 plus the free draw, because most times you're going to be at 6 or less. Plus the 0 cost event aspect of it is pretty nice to be able to surprise your opponent with a counter event that they might not expect because you're tapped out. Then we have Swallow Bond on Avant. It's a 0 cost counter event that says you may trash 1 card from your hand up to one of your leader or character cards, gains plus 3,000 power during this battle. So we've seen plenty of these in the past. We're just getting another one in OP15. And then finally for counter events, we have Gum Gum Golden Rifle. It's a plus 4,000 for your leader during this battle. It actually has a pretty nice effect of being able to heal you if you are at 0 life by only paying 1. But I do think that this card doesn't necessarily fall under the advantage category because you are having to go down in hand size to play it. But the counterpart of this is pretty nice. The plus 4,000 for only 1 is often sought after, but never really found. Then on to blockers. We have quite a few blockers in this set, but I think the ones that are also going to be the most impactful are the 2 cost Sentamaru blocker. It says on block, if you have 2 or less life cards, draw 1 card. This 4 cost Pearl is going to be really a nuisance to deal with. On the opponent's turn, if your leader has the East Blue type, this character gains blocker and plus 2,000 power. And then on KO, if your leader has the East Blue type, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 6,000 base power or less. So if you're familiar with Lucky Roo for the Red Hair Pirates, this kind of acts as like a Lucky Roo in this set. Then we have the 4 cost 5,000 power Usopp. On the opponent's turn, this character cannot be rested by effects of your opponent's leader or characters and gains blocker. And then on KO, rest up to one of your opponent's leader or characters with a cost of 7 or less. So this is also, once again, a very big nuisance like the Pearl blocker. This will allow you to remove for a turn a swing from your opponent by blocking something that will allow it to be KO'd. Then we have the 7 cost 9,000 power Sabo blocker. It's an on play if your leader has the Dressrosa type. Activate up to 1 Dressrosa type event from your hand. Sometimes that comes in handy if you have been stockpiling them, but otherwise this is a really solid stat line of 7 cost 9,000 power blocker. Going to be very difficult for a lot of cards to get past without free blocking. So if I find a Sabo, I'm going to be adding it to the deck just because it is one that's almost a borderline game changer. But I think the fact that it doesn't necessarily have another effect outright, you do have to have a little bit of setup for it, makes it slightly worse. Yet again, a 7 cost 9,000 power blocker is great overall. And then one card that doesn't fit into any of the other categories of 2K, counter event, or blocker, but also falls into the category of protection is the 7 cost 8,000 power Zeph. It says when attacking, your leader's base power becomes 7,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. So very similar to the Smoker and Tashigi from EBO4 that we have in this set coming out. This one also allows you to have your base power be 7,000 power. Unfortunately, it doesn't have rush, so you don't get the immediate effect of this. So it does have to sit for a turn in order for this to happen, but it is a very powerful card once it does get going. And then on to everything else for cards that don't fit into the other categories but have decent stat lines or maybe some interesting effects. These are cards you're going to want to add into the deck. Now, typically you're going to want to add as many vanillas into the deck as well. These are cards that have really strong stat lines like 3-5, 4-6, 5-7, 6-8, and they don't have any effects, and usually they have a 1K counter, but there's not a lot of those in this set, unfortunately, so we will have to fill this up with other cards. The first one being Kabaji. It's a 2 cost 3,000 power character that says when attacking, if your opponent has 1 or more given Dawn cards, this character gains plus 2,000 power during this battle. So if your opponent wants to put Dawn underneath anything, whether it's a leader or a character, you get that buff for free. So it's a 2 cost 5,000 power character. If you're going second and your opponent swings 8 immediately, then you have this down on your first turn to be able to go 5-5. That's a really strong play to be able to counter the aggressive start from your opponent. Then we have the 4 cost 5,000 power Arlong. On KO, up to 2 of your opponent's rested cards will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase. I think that's pretty annoying for the opponent to have to deal with. The 4 cost 5,000 power stat line is not the best, but I do think that on KO effect is pretty important. Then we have a 6 cost 8,000 power Ryuma. On play and when attacking, KO up to 1 of your opponent's rested characters at the cost of 4 or less. I think this card is really good if it had a 1K counter, but unfortunately it is counterless, so it can be rather dead in your hand. You're going to want to play this as soon as you possibly can because the on play and when attacking are just really great overall. Then the next 2 cards we're going to talk about are very interesting for this release event. We have the 3 cost 4,000 power Fuza. It says all of your Shura characters and this character can gain unblockable. And then on the opponent's turn, set the base power of all your Shura characters and this character to 6,000 power. Now for the printing of this card, it says characters, but the actual card says cards. So it means that your leader is technically a Shura card. And so that means that your leader is unblockable and also gets to be a 6,000 base power on defense. So that's a really strong valued card here. To be able to play this for 3 and then have that value over the course of a game is really impactful. But even more impactful than that is the 3 cost Holly. It's all of your Ohm characters in this character gain double attack. In the opponent's turn, set the base power of all your Ohm characters, yet again, not characters, cards, and this character to 6,000 power. So your leader gets double attack, plus also is a 6,000 power leader on defense. So in my opinion, this card is a must add just to be able to get that permanent double attack and then have that defensive 6,000 power. Then we have the 8 cost 6,000 power Nami. On play, if your leader has the Straw Hat Crew type, play up to 1 Straw Hat Crew type character card with a cost of 7 or less from your trash. That character gains rush during this turn. I think you need a certain amount of setup for this to happen. It's not impossible. It's very likely for you to be able to get this effect off, but I think the fact that it does need a little bit of setup in order for you to get a really strong effect out of it means that it is slightly worse and not something I'm going to be putting into a different category like the Game Changers category, for instance, but I do think that this card is on the borderline of being there. Then we have Pirate Docking 6, a 5 cost 7,000 power body that says this character gains plus 6 cost, and then on play you may trash 3 cards from the top of your deck, play up to 1 Straw Hat Crew type character card with a cost of 2 or less from your trash, so you have a lot of options there to be able to bring cards back. I think the stat line here is the most important thing to be looking at. And then I think this is like the only vanilla in the set. I might have missed 1 or 2 along the way, but the 4 cost 6,000 power Tony Chopper in yellow is going to be just a really solid stat line to play down on 4, a 1K counter at worst. And then finally, the 7 cost 7,000 power Nico Robin. It says on play, you may add the top card of your life cards to your hand. If your leader has the Straw Hat Crew type, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. Then play up to 1 Sky Island type character card with a cost of 5 or less from your hand. Like the 8 cost Nami, I think that this card could have potential for it to be a pop-off card, but it needs setup in order for that to happen. You need the right card combination in hand, and sometimes you just don't have it. But if you do, I think this card is very, very impactful to the game and could potentially be a game-changing card. So there you have it. That's the OP15 release event guide in a nutshell. These are the cards that I consider to be the best ones to be adding to the deck and the ones to be looking out for when you are opening up your packs. Let me know in the comments below what you guys are looking forward to opening in the OP15 set. Personally, I'm looking forward to all of the Dressrosa cards to be able to build out Lucy. And if this guide helped you out at all, please give the video a thumbs up. It helps out the channel so much. Thank you all for the support. And with OP15 on the horizon, we'll get cooking with some new deck lists very soon. Stay tuned for that. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.